Okay, so we're back again. What do I ask the breeder before I purchase? And this is something I think is really important. I think that a lot of kids don't come out and talk to us a whole lot about what they're looking for. They don't share always a lot of information with us. I think it's because they don't really know what to ask or what to share. So I think this is going to be pretty important. I also think this will kind of help blur some of the lines in communication between the breeder and the buyer. But we're going to talk about it again. My name is Koben Shigeta. I am not a professional. I have some credentials, but this is all just based on my experiences and my opinion. And so some of this stuff may be helpful, some of it may not. Some things I say may be totally contradictory to kind of what you do. And all I ask is that you just use what you want out of this information, and the stuff that you don't want, you definitely don't have to use. But I hope that this is helpful information. Okay, so going forward, so where do we find a breeder? I think this is something that a lot of kids are, when they first get into it, are really looking for. And I would say initially, the best thing to do first is to talk to your local 4-H extension office or your local chapter FFA advisor. They definitely might know of somebody who's selling whatever you're looking for, whether that's club lambs, club cattle, goats, whatever. A really big one, I think, is attending a show. And I kind of feel like if you're getting in the livestock, you've been looking around, you've maybe gone to a show, seen how it works. If you haven't, you probably should. It definitely would give you an idea of what you're getting into before you start. And the reason why I think attending a show and finding a breeder that way is because typically those breeders already know what you need. They already know what you're looking for. They're producing the animal that you're trying to get. And they put a lot of time and care into those animals. I mean, to raise a show animal, it's not cheap, it's not easy, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of knowledge, and those breeders are going to be really, really helpful to work with. So attending a show, in my opinion, is a really great resource and a really great way to find a breeder. And then last is looking online. This is something more new. There's definitely a lot of online auctions. And so we're going to go ahead and get into that online thing right now a little bit. So online sales or in person, what's kind of the difference? And I want to say online sales are great. Oftentimes they're giving you the cream of the crop. And the reason why is because they can get a bigger bang for their buck, so you're gonna definitely get a better option online. But what does that mean? Does it mean I need to see a video? And the answer to that is yeah, I think so. You know, I've bought goats online. I've not bought goats online, and I feel like it's really awesome to buy them online because you can get genetics that you're not used to getting locally. A lot of the youth are going to be buying maybe some of the same hogs from the same breeder that's local, especially if they've been really competitive in the ring. Typically, youth don't reach all the way out across the country to get a club animal. But it's kind of interesting. So you might be able to bring something into the area that typically the judges like that we're not seeing a whole lot of. But some cons to online sales. So we all know this. All the kids know this. If you're a youth member listening to this, you probably know of Snapchat, all the TikTok. There's filters on everything. You can make yourself look like a dog, a cat, whatever. And it's the same thing with goats and sheep and cows. With Photoshop, we can doll up a lot of pictures. We can make legs look better than they do, top lines look better than they do. We can make an animal look bigger than it really is. And so this is why I think it's really important to not only just look at the pictures, but to also ask for a video. They need to provide you a video. And if they're not going to provide you a video, I would almost be hesitant to buy the animal. And this is why. I want to see how that animal looks when it travels towards me. I want to see how that animal looks when it walks away from me. And I want to see how that animal looks on a profile from me. All of those things will tell me what the top line of that animal looks like. What if it's going to hawk in at all when it's coming away from me. All these things that we need to be able to see to know if this is a quality animal or not. And kind of a big con to being an online sale is if it's really far away, you can't get your hands on that animal. And I really, really like to get my hands on animals to see just how big they are. I've clipped up a lot of goats, and I do know that we can use hair to do a lot of things. And so when you get your hands on that animal, you really get a feel for what's underneath all that and what it really is. And so online sales, yes, I think they're a great idea, but I think that you need to have a video. And if you can touch them, even better. Okay, so I found a breeder. What now? So this is something that I think a lot of youth don't do, and they really need to. So as a breeder, we really need to hear from you about the date of your fair. And the reason why is because our animals, we're breeding animals and we have kids hitting the ground, lambs hitting the ground, you know, from whatever times. For us, it's all year long. Other people might be for just a short amount of time. So it's important for us to know when's the date of your fair and when we would expect those animals to be finished, because then we can help you select an animal that's going to better fit that criteria. Another really big thing to know is minimum and max weights for your initial weigh-in and your final weigh-in. As a breeder, we would love to know that. The reason why is because there are some rams, some bucks, whatever does ewes out there that produce lambs and kids that will grow either fast and mature out fast. So it only takes like 5 to 6 months to be right where they need to be to go to a terminal sale, or it could take anywhere from 8 to 12 months. So it just depends. And so if we know that your maximum weight at a fair is 100, and we've got an animal that we know is probably going to max out at like 110, then we can make a better decision as to not showing you that animal or letting you know that, hey, this, you can choose this as your project, but it's a possibility you might need to be watching that as you get closer to the end of your fair time. So definitely something you need to let us know as breeders. And then also, we need to check birth dates for those animals too. A lot of fairs will make a rule where you can't have an animal pass that's older than, the first of the year. And so as a breeder, you need to let us know what your fair's rules are on birth dates so that we can make sure to get you a project animal that fits that criteria. And then as far as breed stock goes, this is something that even outside of 4-H, I always, have with people. And it's something that I always ask them when they reach out to me and say, hey, I'm looking for a doe, or I'm looking for a buck. I always want to know, what's your focus in your program? What are you trying to do? Because there's a big difference between club stock and purebred full blood stock. They definitely look different. They have different functions, different means. And so as a breeder, I would really love to know that from you, what you're kind of looking for, so that I can get you either the right kind of animal or get you in touch with somebody who's raising the right kind of animal. Okay. And then this, I get kids come out all the time looking at weathers, picking up weathers. And I'm always shocked by how many kids don't ask me questions. This is such a big thing, so important. And part of your project in animal husbandry is to kind of know what you're getting into and making sure that you're checking off all the check marks as to what you need to ask me as a breeder. So make sure when you go out, to wherever you're going to pick up that animal, that you take a pen and paper and you ask these questions. So the first question I always ask is, when was this animal weaned? And this is such a big deal for me. The reason why is because when we wean animals, they get stressed. And stress causes the body and immune system to do a lot of crazy things. And I'm not going to get into the mechanics of all this, but this is what I will say. I know from experience, as a buyer, as a 4-H FFA member once, that a lot of breeders I worked with, they like to do the CDT and wean them from the mom the day they sent them away. It was almost like you went out and they said, pick a lamb, you picked a lamb, and then they're like, all right, that's the one, and we'll give them their dewormer and shot right now. And that's crazy to me, because they have so much stress leaving the facility. They have stress being weaned from their mom. They have stress on the travel. And what we know now is that vaccines do not work as well when we have stressed animals. And so it's really important that as a breeder, if you are a breeder watching this video, that you're definitely vaccinating these animals that you're about to send away at least 14 days before you send them out, because these animals need time for that vaccine to work, and they don't need to be stressed the day that you give it. It's just not going to work, and it's not going to set youth up for success. The dewormer, as youth, you need to be asking about dewormer. Has this animal been dewormed? When was it dewormed? And with what? Not only is this a question that you may be asked whenever you go to show your animal, but it's important to know for your records what this animal has been given. It's important to look at FAMACHA test. It's important to pay attention to that animal. So this is just another husbandry thing that you need to cross off. Now, this next part, in my opinion, is a huge part, something that youth never ask me. They definitely need to ask me. And that question is, what are you feeding? Um, it is so difficult for these animals. So they're stressed, right? They're leaving the facility stressed because they're leaving where they're used to being. They're young, and then you're going to switch up the feed on them. And so then we've got these youth that are calling into the vet clinic saying, "Man, I just bought this goat 3 days ago. It looked great when I picked it up. It's had diarrhea nonstop. Today it doesn't want to eat. It's grinding its teeth." And so now we've got an animal that has really, really bad diarrhea, isn't thriving, is super dehydrated. It's at 90 degrees outside. And it all started from what? From switching the feed. It's so important to ask the breeder what they're feeding. It's important to know what they're feeding. And as a breeder, I usually will send youth home with some feed so that they can start mixing in that feed with the feed that they're going to be feeding. But I will say this, if you're working with a good breeder, if you've gone to a show and they are raising animals that you like, a lot of the times it's a good idea to kind of just go with the feed that they're feeding. And so this is important to ask. It's something to take note of, and it's something to maybe consider as far as your program, what you're feeding. Um, Next is what minerals are they using? I think it's important to just know. It's definitely good for your records. And then this is kind of a big thing, kind of not. If it's a buck or ram, has it been castrated and what age? There's kind of mixed reviews about whether an animal's urethra has become mature enough. When you're castrating babies that are like 2 weeks old, will the urethra be as developed, and is it more prone to getting stones? There's a lot of research in it. There's not a lot of money in it to really figure that out. So for me, a rule of thumb is I always castrate later just in case. But a lot of breeders don't always do that. And so as a youth member out there buying from a breeder, it's important to ask that question. The next thing that's important to ask is, has it been castrated? Um, I know when my wife was doing the fair and she was a superintendent, there were animals that would walk across the scale and they didn't have a band on. They needed to be castrated. They were a lot older now. They were going to need to be put on antibiotics, and now it was going to be an issue with their record books and stuff. And so it's just important to ask that question. Have they been castrated? If they haven't been castrated, then it's time to get them castrated. And when you're castrating, it's important to count 2 testicles. I don't know how many times we see an animal come in with a retained testicle because either the breeder didn't do it right or the purchaser didn't do it right. So that's a really important thing to talk about. And then last is just kind of one of those things. Does it have a scrapies tag? As a breeder, we need to provide you with that. It's something with the USDA for scrapies. It's a disease that if we've got it, it needs to be tracked back to us. And this is definitely something that you guys have to get into a fair. So just make sure that when you do pick up that animal, or if you're going out to that breeder, that you're going to get that scrapies tag. Okay, so now you're at the breeder's facilities. And I'm kind of going to give kind of an example here, why I put this in here and why I think it's important. And when I was buying lambs when I was younger, I looked at a lot of lambs. And I remember there was one breeder that I really liked what they had online. But when I went out to their facilities, I saw a lot of sheep that were really emaciated. Their wool was falling out. They didn't look very good. They were super wormy. I asked questions to the breeder. They really didn't know as much as I thought they knew. And it kind of made me make a decision to not use them. And so I think when you get out to the breeder's facilities as a buyer, it's really important to take a look around, see what their other animals look like, see what their facilities look like, and then are they a knowledgeable breeder? Can they answer your questions? If we go back to the previous slide and you ask those questions, how many of those things can they answer, and do they feel like they can answer in confidence? Because all those questions are things that a breeder should be able to provide you with. Another thing is when you're looking at those animals out at their place, are they thin? Do they have like big old lumps at their jaw? These are all things to pay attention to and look at signs of, to see, is this a breeder that I want to purchase from? Do I want to bring this animal to my property? What kind of things does this animal potentially have? So it's important to pay attention to that. And then also, does the animal that you're looking at meet your criteria for your budget? And this would be more for like online stuff. You see something online like I did, you go out there, you look at it, and you're like, wow, that really kind of wasn't what I was expecting. It's your project, it's your money, it's your time. And if you're raising sheep and goats, it's quite the investment to put into them to feed them. And so making the first decision to pick up that animal is really important. And so if it's definitely not something that you think you can work with, then you need to back out of it. You need to find something, which is why it's really important to always have a plan B. So make sure you do that. And then lastly, I'm not going to really go into this too much, but just to remember to have a realistic budget for yourself. Prices on these animals range anywhere from $150 to $100,000. That's a huge range. And it's a big range because we have jackpotting now where the youth can go and they can win $20,000 as a jackpot prize, so it makes sense. It pans out to buy an animal that's, over $100,000. And then there's also breeders out here who are trying to help youth out, and they're trying not to charge too much for these animals, and they're giving them to you for 200, 300, 400, whatever that price may be. So price doesn't always reflect the quality of animal, but just be prepared to be ready to spend at least $150 on a project. Okay, your responsibility and the breeder's responsibility. I really wanted to get into this. I feel like this is kind of one of those things that we don't talk about, that I feel like every breeder wishes we talked about, and also what every buyer needs to talk about. So we'll kind of go into this. What are the responsibilities of the breeder? And for you, it's to provide you with a healthy animal. When you go look at that animal, when you go to their facilities and pick up that animal, they need to provide you a healthy animal. That animal shouldn't have sores or lumps or bumps. They might have an injection site abscess that's pretty common, but as far as like how they look, they need to be healthy. They also need to provide you with proper herd identification. They need to give you a scrapies tag. Do not leave their facilities with a fair animal that you're going to be using in your project without a scrapies tag. You have to have that. They need to provide that to you. And they also should provide you paperwork of a bill of sale. A lot of groups now are asking to see that bill of sale to prove that that animal is yours. Even if they don't, I think it's always a good idea to have it. If you're a breeder, be prepared to provide those bill of sales. It's definitely something that's starting to happen a lot more, and it's just better to just be prepared. And a vaccine record would be nice. Not all breeders keep that, but if they do, it's always nice to have a copy of that for your paperwork. And then to provide you a list of feed that they're feeding. That breeder needs to be able to tell you exactly what they're feeding. If they can't do that, don't buy from them. That's just, I have to say it. It's the way it's going to be. You need to know your project. They need to know what they're producing. And if you're going to have a successful project, it starts with the breeder being knowledgeable. So make sure that that breeder can provide you with that information so that when you take that animal home, you're not going to give it a ton of stuff that it's not used to having and then deal with a ton of diarrhea and deal with a sick animal that's stressed. That's definitely not where we want to go. And then what's your responsibility as the buyer? It's your responsibility to feed that animal. It's your responsibility to care for that animal. And it's your responsibility to ask your resources for help. In my first video, we talked about resources being your family, your community, your 4-H leaders, your FFA advisors. Those are all really great resources to go to for help. Okay, so what is not the breeder's responsibility? I feel like I have to touch on this, and I'm not trying to kind of ding on anyone at all, but these are just things that I've noticed as a buyer and as a breeder, and things that kind of just need to be said. It's almost like an etiquette that we need to talk about. And what that is what is not the breeder's responsibility? It is not their responsibility if you buy an animal from them and it gets urinary stones. Urinary stones, this is what I see all the time is a youth will buy a project and they have all the good intentions to feed what the breeder said they should feed, whether that's a Purina grain that's got ammonium chloride in it, feeding X amount of alfalfa, whatever. And then they get to the grain and they're like, holy moly, it's expensive. I talked to my neighbor down the road who knows a guy who has these animals, and he says that he just feeds sweet feed. Sweet feed is $8 to $9 at the store. Makes way more sense to buy that and feed that for this animal. And then next thing you know, you got a kid out there that's kicking in its belly because it's got stones. That is not the breeder's responsibility. It is your responsibility to make sure that you're feeding the animal the right diet to avoid that. It is also their responsibility if your animal isn't growing well. Again, this comes down to husbandry from you. Are you feeding that animal? Are you providing it shelter? Are you providing it water? Are you providing it all the things that it needs? Are you paying attention to how it's doing? Does it have diarrhea? Have you been in contact with the veterinarian? These are all things that need to be talked about before asking the breeder. The breeder can't fix your animal from afar. They guarantee you a healthy animal when it leaves their facility, but they can't provide you consistent care all the way through your project because at the end of the day, it's your project. These are your goals and it's your time. Another big thing I want to talk about is placing in class. I sit in the stands all the time and listen. I go to a lot of the fairs to support a lot of the youth. And I hear parents say all the time, oh, we didn't place that well, but we bought this lamb from so and so, and they don't have very good lambs. I just want to say this. I can take an animal that is lesser quality, put more time, more feed, more exercise into it, and beat the animal that's better than me in class all day, every day, if they didn't put the same amount of effort into that animal as I did. I will say I've argued a lot with people that we show with, and we've kind of come to this consensus that, yeah, I mean, 30% of it is the animal, right? But the other 70%, that's you. That's you as a showman. That's you knowing the flaws of your animal. That's you getting that animal ready for the show. And that's you showing the judge as a showman the best qualities of your animal and hiding every single flaw you can find because there's no such thing as a perfect animal. Every animal has flaws. And this just goes down to show your success, your husbandry, your understanding as a showman, how to handle that animal. And so don't blame the breeder for your placings in class. You've had this animal for what, 3, 4, 5 months? It's really your responsibility to make sure that that animal is ready. And at the end of the day, you ultimately chose that animal to go into the class with. So please don't blame the breeders for your placings. And one thing, a lot of breeders are really great about working with youth. I'm super good about it. Usually, I'll tell the kids that work with me, my phone is on 24/7. You can call me with any questions, but I'm kind of a rare duck. A lot of breeders, they don't necessarily have the answers, or they're kind of like, we sell you the animal and then we're done. We want to come and watch you at the fair. We want to see what you did with our project that we sold you. But, we can't be on the phone 24/7 for that animal. And so remember, before you call your breeders and ask them, remember that you have a society around you. You have other 4-H members that you can work with, or FFA. You have advisors. You have 4-H leaders. There are so many other resources. We talked about resources and how big and broad of a term that is. And remember to utilize those resources too, and not just focus on the breeders. Because I will tell you, when a breeder sells 30 animals to 30 different kids and they get phone calls every day about things like, hey, I bought this goat from you, and that was about 4 weeks ago, and all of a sudden today she doesn't want to eat her food. What's going on? The answer is I don't know. You've had the animal for a while. You should probably contact your veterinarian. These are all things that you got to remember. Who do I ask? Which resource do I need to use? And what's the best way to go about it? Because at the end of the day, all we all want is for you to have a successful project, make it in the ring, do your very best, and hopefully come out of there with a ribbon that you can say you're proud of. So I hope this video was helpful. Again, these are just my opinions. None of this is gospel, but I hope that this helps some of you, and hopefully you enjoyed this video and be prepared for the next one. All right, thanks.